All right, everybody, welcome back to the Paperboy podcast. Today I've got an awesome interview for you with Jason Bermas, the original InfoWarrior. We recorded this interview back in early September. I think it was September 5th. But I think you're going to hear how it's even more relevant today, what with us being in the midst of a second wave and the increased lockdown measures we were seeing across the globe. Make sure you share the show if you like it. That's the only way we're going to get it out there. You can always contact me at yourpaperboy@protonmail.com or check out the website yourpaperboy.com, or you can reach me on Twitter at _yourpaperboy. That's YOUR Paperboy. All right, let's get into our interview with Jason, where I started out by asking him what woke him up to the establishment narrative being false.
Oh boy. So I guess even as a youngster, I was kind of curious about certain things. If you go into me being a kid of the 80s, I was born in 79, way before the internet era. There was this thing called Time Life's I think it was Unexplained Mysteries book series, and they were running these infomercials and all these other things of the pyramids and aliens, and there was some paranormal stuff in there too, but it was always like read the book. And UFOs had caught my attention as a kid because when you're watching like ET or, generally what's on, you're just thinking this is all nonsense. It's just science fiction. It's stuff that you've been taught as pretend. And I specifically remember the very first time I gave it credence was when I was talking to one of my mother's boyfriends, and he was telling me about it. And I'm like, well, that's odd. I don't know. And it just so happened around the same time my father, who I was with on the weekends, had gotten the Time Life series. So every month a new book would come, right? So some of the more fascinating ones to me, because this is before you could just look up any picture or video on the internet. You had to go to a library, right? So, the Loch Ness Monster, they had stills of the famous Bigfoot video in one, but by far UFOs was like, wow, this is really interesting. So from the time I was a pre-teenager to that, I kind of had a fascination there. And then along the way, I'm of the generation where JFK was fictionalized and Oliver Stone put out that successful film. That got me thinking. I was looking into that. And pre 9/11, even when the internet first became a little bit more than just chat messenger, right? More than IRC trading of files, but people putting them up so you could download them. One of the first things I did, aside from like all the controversial, maybe not real UFO documents, right? The Majestic 12. I read that, I remember. But I was really interested in MK Ultra. So the MK Ultra files were online. And so there was like a plethora of things that I was questioning by the time I was a teenager. I'd probably come to, at least the realization that my government was involved in murdering my president. But at the time, I was so brainwashed into thinking kind of right versus left, communist versus, democracy, all these things that, well, they had to do it. He's soft on Russia. If they didn't kill him, right. They had painted him up to be such a commie everywhere. And I had nowhere near the full picture. So 9/11 rolls around. I'm a 22-year-old guy. I remember I was from New York, but it's upstate New York State. And I go to school with and friends with a lot of people from Long Island and New York City. So one of my guys who's in my fraternity and I'm friends with to this day, lives down Long Island. He comes running into my room. He's like, the towers are gone. Now, this is when I used to be working till like 4 a.m. at a pizza shop, etc. And with that, I'm like, what do you mean gone? That doesn't make any sense. I'd been in the World Trade Center several times. It wasn't clicking with me. I remember the 93 bombing, right? And not even a visible dent other than like the tragedy you saw kind of in video clips or whatever. So I go downstairs and I start watching it. And by this time, they both collapsed. So they're replaying this thing, right? And I'm seeing the planes hit for the first time, but I'm looking at it and immediately I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be bombs in those buildings. I mean, those buildings don't fall like that. But again, everything's happening really rapidly. I'm literally just gaining consciousness. This is boom, flash imagery, kind of big for the time. And I'll never forget it. I took a shower. And I've started to make my way over to where I worked, and I went out, and another guy from Long Island I know, he's freaking out, my neighbor. You know, people aren't able to get in touch with their parents at this point. You know, the cell towers are down. I mean, people are really having a fit. And this guy's already cursing out bin Laden. Okay. Already, I mean, we're talking about the day of. I don't even know if it's noon yet. And he's cursing to and he says these, you know, mother effing terrorists from the Middle East. And I go, well, you know, at the time I go, well, it was a white guy that did Oklahoma City. And I go, it's pretty early to be calling who did this. But from there on, I was buying into the narrative, right? It was blasting hardcore. Here and there, you would see some glimpses of some weird stuff. I remember MSNBC was doing one where they were trafficking in arms. And it was actually Chris Hansen, and it was raising some questions for me. And you'd get a glimpse at maybe like Atta training at a school, but they would spin it, you know, in the United States. And it really wasn't until after the Lepentigate book came out, and I'd been flipping through the news. I'd become a news junkie, right? Even before this, I was kind of an info junkie, and I'd always use the tools of the time. So before torrents were around, the direct access networks like Notella or Nutella or Morpheus or LimeWire, those were all things I was just consuming a massive amount of data and getting documentaries, etc. Raw news footage from 9/11 was my new thing after that, right? Like, and all these other things I could, but this is still before I'd woken up. Just anything I could get, you know? And the Lepentigate thing breaks, and again, you have these preconceived narratives that are in your head, right? And so one of the big preconceived narratives that was being thrown around pre 9/11 and then post 9/11 was the French hate us, and they got nothing but conspiracy theorists there, yeah. Right? So Lepentigate by Ethereum Hassan comes out, and I'm flipping through, and I see Fox News, right? And Fox News is tearing into this thing, and it's got to be 6 months or so after the attack. And I'm like, you know, F the French. Of course they put something terrible like this out.
Freedom fries, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is before even the Freedom Fries controversy, right? But yes, exactly. The narrative just kept going, but it clicked in my head. And then I remember on MSNBC, it's the run up to the Iraq War, and I'm watching again, and they're talking about human shields in Iraq. American human shields, going to put them on the tops of buildings. Blood will be on your hand. And there's a back and forth going on, and I hear, you know, I want to say it's, man, I can't remember what his name is right now, but you know him if he's still around. And he says, "Are you going to tell me that the Air Force couldn't get to such and such in this time?" And he starts alluding to like a stand down. And I'm like, man, that's pretty odd. And that's a good question. Like, that is a weird thing. I'm like, we are number one. So I guess it all culminates in me actually going back to my old high school. Okay, so I live about an hour away from where I went to high school. And a couple of my friends, remember I'm 22 at the time, had recently graduated and now become teachers there, right? So there used to be like a men's night basketball thing once a week where people would get together. So I'm in my old high school where I graduated, where I suited up. They remodeled a little bit. And I go to take a piss in the locker room, and there's a urinal cake with Osama bin Laden's face on it that says Operation Enduring Freedom.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's not just a high school, it's a middle school too. You know, you're talking about 12 to 18, pretty impressionable kids. I graduated with like 54 kids. And something really clicked in my brain right there that said, whoa, I mean, I used to do duck and cover drills when the Russians were the enemy, and I never pissed on Gorbachev's face.
Right,
you know,
right.
That was never something that was in the cards. I go, this is next level.
Yeah.
And I had known, again, about JFK. I didn't trust my government. I'd seen all these things that, you know, were still stuck in my mind. And I said, you know what? I better see if these bastards did this, you know what I mean, or they were involved at all. I find two sites, and they're still up today, www.911timeline.net And it was just a synopsis from 12 a.m. to 12 a.m. that day with a little precursor on how much we spend, how many people were actually on the planes percentage wise, a few things to really think about, you know? And this thing, if you print it out, it's like 40 pages long. I read the whole thing. And then I went to the other site, 911standdown.net. And these were by Mark R. Elsis. I always give this guy credit because there's no doubt this is what got me down that trail. And I was angry by the end of it. I'm sitting there, I'm clicking every link, I'm going back and forth. And now I've got a mission where I really want to find out what's going on. And everything snowballs. That's how I find Alex Jones and 9/11 The Road to Tyranny. That's even how I found the original Loose Change before it went viral, before the second edition. To be aware of that and then fall into this Loose Change crew and this, documentary that kind of goes viral and helps change the world, hopefully for the better. So, I mean, after that, after you figure out that people within your government and within society will not only tolerate but proliferate a war against everybody and take lives and smile in your face while doing it, and then use that event to go slaughter tens of millions, if not hundreds of people overseas, I'm not down with that, and I'll never be down with that. And it shows you that, you could look at it not even just from a humanitarian perspective, but as a very selfish one where you realize that you are as much a target as anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so just sticking with 9/11 a little bit, I mean, it's funny when you talk about your buddy on noon of that day talking about Osama bin Laden, and it makes me think of that attack they just had on Beirut. And it was like 3 hours after the attack happened, you're seeing press articles come out saying, well, it's not Israel's fault. And it's like, well, how the hell do you know that Israel wasn't involved yet? Like, that's a little bit early to be calling it on that, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's just, it's pretty wild.
Again, that just faded into the news.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of relevance there to me. Like, well, first of all, I was one of the first people, at least in the alternative, to cover at least 3 or 4 of the videos that were out. I'd caught it within the first hour. And I remember watching it for the first time, right? The first one, it kind of catches you by shock. It's a longer video. You are just looking at a building on fire, right? You can't even hear the crackles in the background because it's too far away. And then all of a sudden, something very unexpected happens, let's just say.
Yeah.
Now, number one, I've yet to see, now it's got to be 3 to 5 weeks later. I don't know. It's somewhere in that range, right? Now, still don't know how the initial fire started, right? There's no video footage prior to whatever happened in that building, whether it was just which is very odd for a city of that size. All right. It interests me how the fire actually started. Was there an attack? Was there maybe an explosion? I don't know. But after the fact, you do know that you had this massive explosion that is a multitude times more powerful than a plane of jet fuel.
Yeah,
and it did not knock down a building right next to it. And it, literally tore. You can watch some of these videos. You watch the faces of these buildings being torn off and flipped over. And, no matter what you believe that was, whether you believe the ammonium nitrate storage story, or you think that they had different types of weapons underneath and that's why it was a target, or you believe some other kind of theory, there is no doubt that thing, again, was way more powerful than planes and jet fuel ever could be.
Just bringing it back to 9/11 briefly, because I know you're from the New York area. I'm just curious how many people around you still buy the kind of the establishment narrative there.
Really depends, man. Now you're kind of like in this new generation, right, where they don't even care. Right? It's going to be 19 years since then. This is history now to them. They don't really have any grasp on it. Just like, my generation growing up doesn't really have a grasp on how powerful Watergate was, right? That's a similar, that's a pretty similar timeline. That's even sooner, really, when you think about it. But certainly didn't have a grasp on what the JFK, RFK, MLK assassinations felt like going on. Because you would feel like, again, that generation was very skeptical of what was going on, was asking questions, but the media was controlling it. And, later on, there were questions, but most people had kind of gone about their business. The United States was booming in the 80s. Don't get me wrong, not everywhere. I was among, the poor and, in these weird situations and all that other stuff. But a lot of people were not. And they were happy with their government. And, Reagan was an era of hope. They'd grown up with him in their living rooms, right? He's California's governor. It's kind of the rise of the super facade of the benevolent United States, right? After JFK, intelligence did a really good job of not only projecting us as a superpower, but making, America believe that dream that's become a nightmare.
Mm-hmm. That's funny about Reagan too. I mean, I'm sure some people thought, well, this guy's an actor. Like, what is he doing being your president? And now we kind of have a similar situation. I'm Canadian with Justin Trudeau, right? With our own theater teacher who's ruling the nation. And it really, to me, it kind of exposes that they're all just puppets, right? They're there to present an agenda for a larger agency above them.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I mean, what a great way to really illustrate that is that it doesn't matter if you think you're going in there with a superhero cape and you're going to change the world and you're going to take down the deep state like Donald Trump, I believe, thought he was going to. I think he really believed he was going to step in there and everything he thought was right, and this is going to be easy, and I'm going to take these guys out. He twice failed to give us all of the JFK documents. If you can't reveal the deep state from 1963, from 50 plus years ago, how are you going to take the current deep state that is an octopus of a leviathan, more strong and decentralized and plausibly denial everywhere, right? Like they deny this and this, and grown so much that you think you have a shot at the title. I do think there are minor differences in cases, right? And especially now, I think it's more than a minor difference at this point, and that's not me MAGA training it. You wouldn't have heard me talking exactly this way 12 months ago. But the bottom line is the Democratic Party is, and the predator class in general, is outwardly running a visibly senile man that before he was senile was a segregationist, was mentored by Robert Byrd, the former Grand Dragon of the KKK, who he spoke at his funeral, and 3 other KKK members.
Wow.
He was also instrumental during the first Bush administration to kind of bring that vision of globalism to China, that Nixon, Kissinger, Rockefeller vision that really Bush was the next arm up. He was a huge proponent of that. The man wrote an article called How I Learned to Love the New World Order. Right. And it's all about that. It's all about globalism. It's all about China. It's all about all the problems we see erected today. He wrote the crime bill that goes after these small-time drug dealers that are put in crazy situations. And then above all, he helped cover up Pakistan's monetary role in 9/11 and the $100,000 wire transfer to Muhammad Atta. The man met with General Mahmoud Ahmed right after 9/11. He went on television. He bragged about it. He threatened Pakistan on the Senate floor. It's all in my film, Fabled Enemies. And no one even talks about it. He admits it. I mean, this guy helped cover up the money movement to the alleged lead hijacker. Not in the fucking, I don't know if I can curse here, but.
Oh, you're good. Yeah, give it.
Okay. Yeah. Not in the fucking 9/11 report. No scrutiny by the media. Forget it. And we're talking about he's on camera at the CFR bragging about withholding $1 billion from the Ukraine, basically saying, if you don't fire the prosecutor that's going after my son, I'm going to leave on a plane with the money. I mean, this dude was gangster. Joey B was a gangster. All right. That's how I've always referred to him. And then when it got to the debates this year, you could visibly see he was no longer where he was even 2 years ago, right, at that CFR meeting. So to me, President Trump, Sleepy Joe was fitting, but now we're not there. We're at zombie Joe Biden. There's not a 5-minute instance, okay, and no matter how many steroids they inject him with or whatever they got him on, where he can have a comprehensive thought verbally come out of his mouth.
Yeah, man. So that's the thing about Biden. It's almost like if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to see it, did it really happen? Well, if Joe doesn't remember these things that he's been saying, did it really happen in his world, right?
I
he's
don't think
just
it
got
did.
this. No, exactly. But there's a historical record there. But just in terms of Trump, I mean, I'm a Canadian, so I kind of observe this stuff. I mean, we get all of your media thrust upon us as well, right? But I'm a little bit removed. It doesn't affect my life as directly as it does yours. And I just can't help but see Trump as kind of this P.T. Barnum character, right? Who's meant to lead the circus off a cliff. Like it seems like he's this polarizing figure that is being utilized in every way. Like they managed to make health a partisan issue, for example, with HCQ being used in the media. All of a sudden it's a left right issue. You're a MAGA supporter if you want a $2 cure or prophylactic, right?
Yeah, well, all right. So let's talk about all that. P.T. Barnum, you're not wrong. I mean, before Trump was even elected, okay, before he was even elected, these are the things that I said. Hold on, I got my niece outside. Hey, what? Yeah, go take whatever you want, kid. You don't even have to ask. All right. Sorry.
Oh, you're good, man.
Anyway,
You're good. I got a couple of young ones.
Yeah, she needs the spicy ramen. So anyway, before he was even elected, yep, you got it, baby. You had to understand who you were getting. It was either him or Hillary Clinton, right? And polarizing isn't the word, because when you look at the guy, number one, anybody knew that followed him. Number one, he was a misogynist, 100%. He was on wife number 3. He talked that way. He ran beauty pageants. Everybody knew it.
Yeah.
Everybody knew it. Okay. 2, he was a gangster. All right. It's not just building buildings in New York. When you help erect and are the driving force to erect Atlantic City, a city based around gambling, of course,
Right.
in New Jersey, of course you are working with organized crime.
Yep.
Anybody, again, half a brain knew that. Third, he is an actor, okay? And we're not only just talking about, his reality show that I never watched. He has been on television since I was a kid. He's one of the most recognizable faces in pop culture to me, okay? And the other thing they didn't count on is that he knew about, you talked about P.T. Barnum, the wrestling crowd.
Yep.
He had literally been in professional wrestling since the 80s. Another part of his act and grip. People came out in droves from that community to go vote for him. He's not stupid. So all those things, and I always said, look, it's also dangerous that he's going to go along with the military industrial complex. He's always talking about the military, et cetera. That being said, in comparison to Joe now, right? You've got a situation where Joe is openly running on a campaign of mandatory masks. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't get in until January. That means we're giving up. All right. Yeah. And I've got a whole fiasco going on in my community now where we have 1,000 positives in a very small community. Look up SUNY Oneonta. No one's in the hospital. No one's in the hospital. There hasn't been one hospitalization. Okay. I think there's one kid with a fever. So if this doesn't prove that it's time to end the lockdowns, they're spinning it too. They brought all these college kids back without testing them first on the PCR test because they didn't want to lose the money and they wanted to scare everybody after the fact. Yep. So they tried to blame parties. It's like they're living in dorms together. They're living in buildings together. They're 18 to 20 down again. So if he's running on mandatory masks and he was saying he would lock the economy down again, and we're already seeing statewide officials saying they want mandatory vaccines, he's a nightmare. And he's not even in control. Kamala Vampiris is, and she's not even in control. I mean, this is a woman who is the social climber of the DC decade if she gets into power. Let's be honest. I mean, this is a woman who slept with a married man, an insider, to get to where she was. Willie Brown, when he was 61, I think, and she was 29, and whatever with the ages, but it shows who she is, okay, was the mayor of San Francisco, got a call on the morning of 9/11 not to get on a plane, and is a Bohemian Grove Club member. Mm-hmm. All right. If that's not an insider, and you see how this woman has acted, this is the kind of woman that will be your next door neighbor across the street, will come over for a holiday dinner while she's banging your husband behind your back, cook dinner in the kitchen with you. Yep. And because it's the holiday season, your college-age son is back, and go upstairs and give him a hand job when you're not looking. Like and smile in your face while she eats a chicken leg. That's how I feel about it. Okay. That's the kind of sociopath we're dealing with. And, with Cuomo and what he's done to my state, it is beyond disturbing. The executive orders are so authoritarian and Orwellian and out of control. Again, we should be opened up. right? This should show you that there's pictures out there now of this ISO dorm from last night. So they took a dorm where they were going to isolate kids. I believe there's over 100 kids already in this dorm. On Sunday night, they literally scared the shit out of these kids after they tested positive by calling them after midnight, telling them they had 10 minutes to pack a bag, okay? And then showing up in a full hazmat suit to pick them up and bring them to that dorm. And not only that, and then there's no bedding in some of these dorms, like there's mats to lie on and stuff. They're big, they're open. So last night, just a bunch of them were together. There's no regulation in there. There's nobody watching them. So they're literally posting pictures of White Claw parties. A bunch of 18 to 19-year-olds, like 20 or so of them, are sitting there drinking in the ISO dorm. It's a sick joke, dude. It's a sick joke.
Man, and so you brought up the PCR test, and I think we both know how bogus that test is with the amount of false positives it represents. And then, I mean, you look at how the danger of the coronavirus has been so drastically oversold, right? From the bogus model that predicted 2.2 million deaths in America, the 3.4% mortality that was reported by the WHO director, who was just an absolute muppet. I mean, like it just feels like we're in the middle of kind of a global false flag event, right? With the coronavirus being pushed in order to facilitate the Great Reset, as the World Economic Forum calls it. In Canada, they're calling it the Green Reset, but it seems like they're engineering the collapse of the global economy in order to bring about wholesale changes, in our civilization, and to bring things in like a global digital currency, among other things.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I'd been following this since January when this really started to pop off and seeing things in December. And I was especially concerned being in New York when the first hotspot was in New Rochelle outside of the city, because it was all selective testing, right? And they tested anywhere, they would have found a hotspot. And I'm glad it didn't go full military martial law at that time. If anybody remembers, mid-March to early April, there were a lot of videos of tanks. There were a lot of videos of soldiers. And I really thought they were going to quarantine New York City, with what they were doing there. Basically censoring information put out by doctors like Cameron Siddell about the ventilators, pushing the ventilators, spinning, putting old folks back in nursing homes instead of like the Javits Center, which were the facilities they set up for it. There was so much bizarreness going on. But then everything else I said has happened. I said there would be a consolidation of power. A bunch of billionaires made a lot more money. I said they would push a digital currency. Is anybody really buying the fact there's a coin shortage in the United States? Yet I see it everywhere, and they're only taking this thing. We just didn't really print 6.4 trillion, probably even more than that, by the way. But we probably gave it out in zeros and ones. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So all these things are happening. And, we talked about mandated vaccines, limitation of movement. And this agenda is now right in our face. And I feel like New York is going to be one of, it's not even a beta test, but it's bringing that China model over, and New York State will be the beta test for the rest of the country. Obviously the focus on the city, but when you give this contact tracing army, which is the modern day brown shirts, it should be disbanded immediately. In fact, anybody that instituted it and is still advocating for it should probably be hung in the public square. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's be honest, because this is out of control. I have 70 contact tracers in my town, 70. Oh. And there's 3 sites right now where they're testing and LARPing. And once again, I want to reiterate this. There's no one in the hospital, not one person. I have old people in my community. I have people with diabetes and heart disease and all that stuff in my community. We're not a magic land of unicorns, I promise you. Okay, we represent the rest of the country, but Bloomberg's in charge of that. A billionaire, no one elected, no one certainly wanted on the stage for the presidency. Then you put Bill and Melinda Gates in charge of education. Well, they just gutted the SUNY system on purpose, right? This fiasco, which is a string of different colleges throughout, is only going to get worse and worse, and they're going to drag it out as the election goes on. These spikes also give Cuomo the excuse to maybe shut more down. He's already getting sued by a multitude of bars, restaurants, businesses, event coordinators, because they realize now they shouldn't have played ball in the first place. Right? If you look at the Sweden model, it's there. And then the next billionaire who gets the rest is Eric Schmidt, and Eric Schmidt, the founder of Google, is also the author with Jared Cohen, a CFR member, another member of Google at the time. The new digital age, reshaping the future of people, nations, and businesses. I mean, this is a nightmare layout for society, and he gave it to this guy. And then with all these businesses moving out of New York City, guess who's ready to come back in? He's going to take 3,500 offices. Jeff Bezos. He'll bring the Amazon people in. So literally billionaires down the line for New York with authoritarian rule. I got to leave. And I don't know what's going to happen in this country, but I got to tell you, I expect October to January in the United States to be some of the wildest times we've ever visibly seen in a generation.
Absolutely, man. And you look at Trump now saying they're going to have a vaccine ready by the 1st of November, which is conveniently right before the election. And
well, let me speak to that really quickly. Did a video on that. So like you said before, Trump along the way has tried to, exacerbate this and unlock everything, kind of expose it, right? And give the other side of the story. He did say the hydroxychloroquine. You've got to give him that kind of credit, right? He sucks on a ton of issues. I mean, Assange being probably the most prevalent one right now. Syria, another one, not being able to back up and then going along with the false flag in Duma. There's plenty, right? The Epstein case and even the way it's being handled and Barr, all that stuff. There's a million things. But when it comes to that, he did try to tell everybody about the hydroxychloroquine. He did give everybody the right to try. During this whole thing, he has cut drug prices, which the Democrats promised to do through legislation for decades and never could do. He literally went full Bernie Sanders. He gave people a UBI. Like he did everything that they were going to do anyway, and they still demonized him for it. And now he gave you the convalescent plasma treatment. Well, anybody who's paying attention to this realizes that these vaccines they're talking about is going to do no more than the convalescent plasma treatment, because they don't know if it's going to work. They don't know if it will work to avoid transmission, and they don't know whether it'll work to avoid or lower the mortality rate. What it does do is apparently gives you antibodies for several weeks to several months. That's what they know it does, right? It's the same thing as the antigen stuff. All right, the convalescent plasma. So they attack him for that, and they kind of kept quiet. They didn't demonize that as bad as the hydroxychloroquine, right? Yeah. So now he goes, you know what? I'm just going to play ball, and we won't mandate the vaccine, but we'll put it out there for anybody that wants it, and we'll go back to normal. That's his thing, and he's doing it obviously before the election, not because he believes in it, but because he doesn't want the WHO's vaccine. And the WHO already talking shit. They're already saying there's like some kind of weird thing going, you got to take our vaccine. So Cuomo comes out and he says, okay, this week, and you can hear him say it, he goes, yeah, we heard that vaccine's going to, how convenient. He goes, let me tell you something. If the FDA approves this, we're going to look at it ourselves in New York before recommending it to other New Yorkers. Now, let me tell you something. The New York State Bar Association has already put it on paper. They want to mandate the vaccine, not only for New York, but the entire country, and literally say the Constitution has failed us in this, all right, in this paragraph. So I'll tell you right now that whatever vaccine comes out November 1st, I'm still not getting. But he's talking about whether or not they'll even recommend it. When their vaccine hits the market, there will be no questions. Or they'll spin it some other way, and it won't be recommended. They'll be mandating it, okay? So, we're in bizarro world, man. We're on the flip side. We're in the upside down. I don't know what, if you look at all this stuff, the hermetic symbolism is incredible. The inversion of reality and the acceptance of it, and the fact I walk around downtown where, again, we now know we have almost 1,000 cases here. And a bunch of people are still walking outside with masks like they're not susceptible, like it did anything, okay? You missed your whole summer. It's 90 degrees out, and you were wearing this thing. Get out of here.
Oh, people driving in their cars with masks on, man. It just makes you laugh. And it's just like coming back to the CDC, what do you think of, like, for example, what's his name, Gavin Newsom in California, basically saying we hear that the CDC has recommended we don't test for asymptomatic carriers, but we're going to ignore that. And I'm not sure if something similar has happened in New York. It kind of sounds that way, but it just seems like
asymptomatic. 95+% of these kids are completely asymptomatic. There's one person, I want to out of 1,000 that even had a fever of like 104. That's it. There was never a hospitalization. I'm going to say it again. Never a hospitalization here. and they're waiting. And there are people online, again, they're blaming these kids. They're going, they partied. They have no idea. Their minds are so small. They don't comprehend. They didn't test them beforehand. Let me give you another example right here in Oneonta. So that's the public school. That's the State University of New York program, right? You get about 3,000 kids on campus, 5,000 to 6,000 kids total, okay? Now, they'd already went 90% online, so they took a bit of a hit. But a lot of people wanted to come up to college. It's a party town, dude. They thought they were going to get around in the party. Now, on the flip of that, remember, they didn't test any of these with the PCR test. Now, if that were the measurement, they should have done it, whether it's accurate or not. But they knew they wouldn't do it because they would have got 5 to 10% of that population that then they don't get tuition, and they certainly don't get the room and board for dorm, right? It would have cost them hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars within the first couple weeks alone. So Hartwick College, which is less than a mile away from Oneonta, you literally throw a baseball across the street from each campus, okay, has 2,000 people. They did pre-test. Now, granted, most of the kids from SUNY are from Long Island and New York City, where the biggest outbreaks were, okay? So again, this should be great news, because if these PCR tests are super sensitive, they're probably testing for the antibodies, or they have such a low level of the virus, and there's a thing called herd immunity we talked about in the beginning, right? With the Hartwick kids, they made them all take the PCR test before they came, okay? So everybody who was up there was up there. Now, after this outbreak, it's been 3-4 weeks, okay? Now, since everybody's come back, there are 500 plus confirmed Oneonta kids with this, because you never tested for it. And like I said, there are 2 kids at Hartwick that have it. 2. Are you telling me they didn't interact for the first time ever? You know, I went to school here. Of course they interacted. You know, they went to the same places, the same Walmarts. You know, they went to the same bars and restaurants and all these things. So, you know, is there asymptomatic spread? That doesn't show me that there's asymptomatic spread. If you have 500 on one side, you know, in a pool of 6,000, you have 2 in a pool of 2,000. It's literally the difference between 1 in 1,000 and 1 in 10. So you look at that, and that actually should be great news too, that if you are asymptomatic, you probably can't spread it. There are all these markers going on right in front of me that show you the lockdown should be over, but they want to drag it out. And Bill Gates has openly said till 2022.
Yep. And just in terms of asymptomatic carriers and maskers versus anti-maskers, it just feels like they're always trying to find a way to make the propaganda ubiquitous, right? And bring everybody else in. So they're trying to blame the continued lockdown measures on kids that are at school partying now, or whoever else that they can, to try and bring it all in and make sure it's always about the lockdown. And you just, like, if I'm sure you've seen what's been happening in Australia with people, you know, having their doors kicked in and being arrested for incitement, is what they call it, when, you know, this one pregnant lady was making a post saying, hey, stay socially distant and wear a mask, but come on out and protest the lockdown. And all of a sudden she's getting dragged out of her house, and all of their electronic devices were confiscated by the police. Man, this is like, I think the term Orwellian probably gets overused, but I can't think of another way to describe that.
Oh, the thought police are the real police now in Australia, a westernized nation. A nation, by the way, that did not stand up for Julian Assange, you know, while we go after him. So listen, man, this is it. This is the home stretch right now. I don't know what to say. I don't have all the answers. The tyranny is right in our face everywhere. When people are batting down doors, and, you know, that video, a lot of people were like, this is a hoax. This is fake. That indictment is empty, right? The search warrant or whatever. So I went back after I did the video on it, and I paused it right when they put down the warrant, and he tapes it, because I wanted to see if it really was empty. It wasn't empty. It was totally filled out. It was just so broad and so vague that they can say whatever the fuck they want. You know, it was a checkbox, and then you saw incitement. And because it just says incitement, they don't have to give you a huge answer. They say what they want. And then they come in with their Gestapo boots in fucking masks and take your property and take you away. This is it, man. I mean, look, again, it's not just about the United States. It's about humanity in general. Unfortunately, we failed in a great regard to allow a large slave state to be erected of 1.2 billion people because we wanted trinkets and goods, and, you know, allowed that Kissinger, Rockefeller plan to happen there, that globalist plan of 1.2 billion people under a social credit score system. That's expanded. You know, they want that nationwide by the end of 2022, and I think they'll get it. And
Yeah.
that's the system they want here.
Yeah, that like they already have was it facial recognition being rolled out in California, and they're looking to use it for payment measures, right? Like this stuff is coming here. It seems like they beta test it in China, work out the kinks, and then roll it over to the States and everywhere else in the Western world.
That is correct. And that's why, I don't refer to, one set of people as the ruling class or the super class. It's the predator class, man. Because at the end of the day, if any of these groups ever aren't at the apex of the pyramid, they're going to be vying for it. It's like if you wipe out all the Zionists, you don't think the Saudis have an interest, or you wipe out all the Saudis and the Zionists, you don't think the globalists in Europe have an interest, or even, the neocons in the United States. And, it's these weird, or Russia, for instance, Russia's got their own vision for a new world order, Putin, etc. But they all seem to be working towards that goal of the regimentation of all human beings. Really, because there was so little pushback, it's hard to see otherwise. Like Sweden, for instance, great. They pushed back. They showed the world. Everybody's ignoring them. But they're huge purveyors of the cashless society control grid. They're huge purveyors of, chip technology and transhumanism.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I haven't delved far enough into the whole transhumanism movement, other than a few things I've seen from Corbett and the like. It's a deep dive waiting to happen for me, but it certainly seems like it's a part of their agenda. And I mean, I'm living in Canada, in a Commonwealth nation, so obviously I look at what's happening in Australia and think, well, shit, that's not too far away from being able to be rolled out here, right? And so I'm trying to get my family to kind of move out into the sticks, where I'm living in Vancouver, basically in the city, so it's hard to feel totally safe here when they're rolling out these kind of agendas in the large cities first, right? But I just wanted to kind of take a minute with you and go back through some of the old false flag events. And I think people don't really understand how much proof there is in terms of false flag attacks with governments attacking their own countries, right? Like Global Research is a fantastic organization, and they have a list of 53 confirmed false flag events committed by their own governments, right? And going all the way back to 1788 in the Russo-Swedish War, basically, where the Swedes had some members of their, was it the Royal Opera, so fake military costumes of the Russians, stage an attack on the Russian border, and then be able to draw the Swedish parliament into declaring a defensive war on Russia, right? This is 1788. I mean, the history goes way, way back with proof. But I feel like when you try and talk to anybody about these events, they feel like either A, it can't possibly happen now, or B, it's beyond the pale for a government to attack their own people, right? They can't conceive of that possibly happening.
Yeah. Well, again, that's why 9/11 woke me up so much, because once you get past that and you understand that it's not just, a false flag in the sense that the United States did this to itself. It's an international intelligence operation, or it doesn't work. You did have role players in Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan, in Israel, within our own government to orchestrate that and orchestrate the fear of what now is really, an Anglo-American, Israeli, Saudi empire in Eurasia. Their influence almost has no bounds. There are a few rogue states, Iran being the largest of them. Yep. And otherwise, you have that total spectrum dominance that they've wanted for a long time, and trying and continuing not only to try, but really succeed in somewhat destabilizing other rogue nations like Syria, right? At the same time, destabilizing Libya. People don't even realize we're in Africa through AFRICOM. They have no idea. So this thing has really expanded globally. And now we're seeing really the fruits of our labor come home with what this kind of tyranny will mean for westernized society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, one of the first books that really woke me up was by Naomi Klein. It's called The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. And she basically just kind of details from, I think it was the early 40s, all the way to basically modern present day, how the United States has used the CIA and these other agencies to basically destabilize these economies and bring in democracy. And as I've gotten older and maybe a little wiser about all this, once you hear, spreading democracy, all you can think about is basically, a terrorist overthrow of a government, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, man, I can't remember what the book is called. Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Yep.
And, and I've interviewed him. I can't remember what his name is right now, but basically what you had was this intelligence asset that really wasn't working on the behalf of the United States. It was more like the International Monetary Fund, right? And basically working on behalf of these large globalist banks and organizations to secure resources and put in their puppets. And if you didn't play ball, okay, we got a way for you to play ball, or we'll find somebody else. Yep. And I can't recommend that book. I wish I could remember his name. My old man memory is failing me.
Yeah, man, it's actually been recommended. I think it was Charlie Robinson that I just had on that was talking about that as well. It seems like that book woke a whole lot of people up. And then, I mean, you could take a look at some false flags that never actually occurred, but are awfully closely tied to 9/11, I think, if you look at Operation Northwoods, right? Proposed as a false flag event in 62 with the Joint Chiefs basically trying to draw the U.S. into conflict with Cuba, talking about airplanes being flown as drones and attacking the bases around Guantanamo, basically staging an event to draw them into battle with Cuba. And I mean, it's just one small example, but I think it's hard to deny because it's only a 2 or 3 page memo that you can read from the Joint Chiefs, and it just lays it all out so clearly.
We read the entire document on the channel, start to finish, so everybody could see the different plots and plans. And I always get into, obviously, not only the planes and, shooting it down, but the fact that we were in the 1960s, 1962 to be exact, and they had Global Hawk type technology where they could remotely fly both of these planes. One that was the size of and dressed up like a passenger jet, and the other that would be remotely run was something that they would dress up like a Russian MiG. You know what I mean? So just to have that type of technology pre 9/11 by, 38 years, 39 years, almost 40 years, I would always point to the fact, because I would talk about the possibility of remote controlled planes, right? You had all these drills of different planes and blips, and they were coming out of Cheyenne Mountain. And that's always been a big question, whether the planes hijacked on 9/11 are the ones that hit the towers, especially because you really don't have much debris of Flight 93 in an open field as well. You have an 8-mile debris field over a mountain range in New Baltimore. Everybody wants to point to the Indian River debris, which is about 1.5 miles down the road. But the truth is, it's way bigger than that, right? Again, obfuscating the truth. And then you look at the fact that you have E-4Bs, which are doomsday planes, visibly on the scene before the second plane strike at the World Trade Center, at the second plane strike at the World Trade Center, and also at the Pentagon strike. They're visibly on camera. These are doomsday planes. So, there's a lot of questions that I think when you look at the previous history and something like Northwoods might be able to be hypothesized in an event like 9/11 and say, look, the possibility is at least there. They had the technology. They'd used it before.
What's so interesting to me about 9/11 is it feels like they're really, it seems like whoever perpetrated it is absolutely aware of people's own awareness about false flag events. And it seems like they've kind of worked into the narrative these 3 or 4 different possibilities that's got everybody infighting over who and how it happened, instead of focusing on the fact that a larger global group has come together to make this thing happen.
Well, I think they're good at disinformation. I think you get egos.
Oh, yeah.
I think you get grifters. It's very difficult, having lived through the actual 9/11 truth movement before the term truther even existed, and, kind of been there. There was a moment in time on the run up to that 5th anniversary, I really thought we had a shot. I really did. And we had those people from disinformation, but then you see it all kind of fly back around, when we talk about secret indictments now and the QAnon phenomenon and all that grifting, that wasn't new. That happened in 2003 after Scooter Libby got indicted. After Scooter Libby got indicted, there was a guy named Tom Flacco that was very much, what seemed to be a good journalist on 9/11. You know what I mean? He was telling the truth. He had a website up. But then all of a sudden, he was painting this narrative that Scooter Libby was just the beginning, and they actually had these secret indictments for Cheney and Rumsfeld and all Wolfowitz, and Cheney was the next one to go down. And now we could celebrate because, the military was going to start a coup inside, and this was it. We were going to take Bush and them down. And people, that bought into it got inactive. I understand that you're seeing maybe the opposite of that phenomenon in the streets now with the QAnon stuff. But those people also, number one, you can't believe in superheroes on message boards that make predictions that don't come true. But number two, even when you're going to get into the save our children, you got to have the right stats. I hear 800,000 kids a lot. That's not true. Not in this country. In this country, if you look at the 10, 20-year average, you're somewhere in the realm of 400K, right? Which is a lot, but out of that 400K, about 90% make their way home. Well, I'll tell you what, if you still have 40,000 kids in this country that range from toddler age to 18 disappearing, that's still a big deal. That's still a big deal. And, those kids are being rescued and trafficked. But don't get it twisted where you start talking about things you think you know everything about, and now you're accusing Tom Hanks of pedophilia without any evidence, and you're throwing Katy Perry in there, and then just any celebrity you can. And it takes away from real victims and real evidence and real talking points that, you could go to the Franklin scandal, right? You can talk about Dennis Hasser. You can say the Finders documents are out there. You can talk about Barney Frank running a call boy ring out in D.C. back in the late 80s, early 90s. All these things are real. You could talk about even Jeff Gannon of militarystuds.com being James Guckert and having a front row seat at the White House during the Bush administration, and pictures of George Bush kissing his bald head cheek to cheek with the guy. Like, I mean, and he's writing fluff pieces and neocon pieces promoting these guys for things like Falcon News. So a lot of this stuff is interconnected, man, from human trafficking to underage prostitution to real prostitution of overage trafficking. It's not like Epstein said, oh, they're 18, they're of no use to me. He used a lot of those girls into their 20s for sure. Yeah. So, and maybe not personally for sex, but to, again, compromise others.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a big honeypot operation, right? They're looking for blackmail. And I think Jimmy Savile is another really good example of, just a sick fuck that managed to work his way, or because of his views, managed to be in a position of power and abused it all the way until he died, man. Even if you check his Wikipedia right now, the little blip on the bio, it just talks about his accolades. You have to go way deep in there to see what a disgusting pedophile he was, man. Like his power and the people around him still push all that shit so hard, man. And just like in terms of Q, I've never been a big Q follower, but it does seem like it's meant to placate the masses, right? It's the white knight coming to save everybody. So don't worry, just relax. And as you're talking about earlier on, you're saying basically that same message has been out there for a long time, right? There's always somebody out there just saying, just wait, you don't have to do anything. Don't look too far into these things because we got this. We're looking into it. But now that the Q movement has picked up some steam, they managed to kind of blend in all of these different conspiracies into it. Like they're even blending in 9/11 with it, JFK. Like for some reason, Q has to do with every conspiracy theory now. It's like a catch-all for a crazy person.
Well, again, when you want to muddy the waters, when you want to discredit real things, what do? I mean, 9/11, again, really gaining momentum, weapons of mass destruction. People were really looking at it. What was the rise of the next term? It was truther, right? 9/11 truther. I never call myself a truther because I'm not. I'm a guy that's looking for the truth, and if I'm wrong, I'll admit it. And I'm looking for factual and evidence based theories. I'm not looking for, some kind of farce. For instance, there's, with this Q movement now, a resurrection of another thing, Nasara and Gassara. I was getting all those Nasara emails back in 2008, 2009. Don't worry. There's a cadre of white hat militants that are going to take over, and they got this, and here's this document right here, and it proves it, and look at what they're laying out. We're going to get our Constitution and Bill of Rights back. And I'm like, no, that's inaction. It's not real. It's not reality. And I'm just a guy that's not looking for coded words. He's looking for documentation. Now, I want you to get active. I want you to get out there. But again, with the rise of the 9/11 truth movement, not only did you get truther, but then all of a sudden flat earth became a thing. Mm-hmm. Flat earth, and like, oh, what, you believe the earth is flat too? That was a new talking point if you talked about 9/11. And there are these clever ways that they are, basically able to intellectually institute ideas and narratives into people's minds. If you believe this, then you believe that, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, if you dare talk about hydroxychloroquine and dextromethasone and other steroids, well, you must be a MAGA guy. No, I'm a guy that's trying to look to what people are taking from inhaled steroids like budesonide and zithromax and zinc that is working. That's all I care about. Just because the orange man said it doesn't mean it's automatically wrong or I automatically think he's Jesus Christmas. I
Right.
don't.
Yeah, that's a really good point, man. And I just was covering the protests going on in Berlin, both in the 29th and 1st of August. And if you look at the way the media, CNN and the New York Times covered it, the way that they would group it is they would say, for the first protest, which was obviously, by the way, hundreds of thousands of people, if you look at the photos, right? And then the New York Times article and headline is saying 17,000 right-wingers, neo-Nazis, and conspiracy theorists are getting together to protest the lockdown. So it's automatically grouping you into one of those other three categories if you don't agree with the lockdown, which is just fucking insanity. And it's so insidious. And yet people will buy that hook, line, and sinker because it is so ubiquitous, right? You'll see it on Bloomberg and CNN and everywhere that's showing anything to do with these protests. It drives me crazy.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. I give a lot of credit to David Icke because, David's been around forever. I'm not a lizard person guy. I'm not a Credo Mutwa shape-shifting Anunnaki guy, but I'd read a lot of his stuff. And, I remember when I got my first desk job, which I was just about to be 24, had my own office. I'm doing graphic design, so I could watch or listen to whatever I wanted in the background. And I used to listen to his lectures and, everything from Hollow Moon to, 9/11 to Rothschild Zionism to all these different subjects, okay? And there were some I agreed with him on. Others I found fascinating. I look into Saturnalia, so many things with David. But at the same time, early on in the 9/11 truth movement, I was very critical because these things were associated with that. Like lizard people before flat earth was the other thing. Oh, you believe lizards around the world, that was the big integration. So I had a bone to pick with Ike, Eventually I interviewed him and talked to him. And as time progressed, especially with this Trump administration, he never budged. He never budged. Like, he was one of the only guys that didn't jump on the Trump train, and I felt was treating the administration fairly and looking at what was going on with Jerusalem and the Golan Heights and, holding Trump's feet to the fire, and calling out, basically InfoWars and anybody that was on this new alt-right bandwagon, which is a good thing, And then you get to coronavirus, and me and David have a different opinion on that as well. But I don't think he should be censored. You know what I mean? And he's stuck to his guns. So, props to Ike. It shows how powerful you can be when you are able to look at the world a little differently and then research that world and try to oppose the mass narrative that's being pushed to oppress people and at least give people a choice. Doesn't mean you're going to be right all the time. But, he's got Iconic going. His kids are now more involved. And I think you need more voices, not less. If their information is no good, come up with better information and evidence. Don't just delete theirs. And we're seeing more and more of that today.
Yeah, and I think what shows the strength there and probably some truth of David Icke's message is just how hard he's being censored, right? Like, and how hard they're cracking down on him. They're pulling him down in every possible place. And I know that's a pretty common thing in the alternative media, but it feels like they've gone a level above for Ike. But it does make me wonder about Alex Jones. And I know that you were working for him, years and years back, but when I look at Alex Jones's message, I mean, honestly, when I started looking into the conspiracy stuff, I was put off by people like Alex Jones just because of how intense and crazy he comes across, in his messaging. And I understand now that a lot of the things that he was talking about turn out to actually be factual. The thing that gets memed all the time, like they're turning the frogs gay. Well, actually, in fact, they were making them like hermaphrodites, right? It was turning them into that. But just the way that he delivers his message kind of, I think, puts people off. But that makes me wonder why they wouldn't let him be in the mainstream, because there's probably a lot of people like me that when they first are experienced or exposed to those conspiracies, they come across a man like Alex Jones, who's obviously well known in the public, and then think, oh, he's just a lunatic, and go back to my, reading Wikipedia to find out the truth of facts, right?
Alex is an interesting character, obviously, and we used to be close. He produced several of my films, and the first person that he ever gave their own show to, the InfoWarrior. There are moments. Obviously, if you watched when I was there, I challenged Alex on a lot of things. You know what I mean? There were times me and him would go back and forth. It was always in a respectful manner. But I think I got him to look at the world a little bit differently, right? After I left, the documentary film thing kind of fell by the wayside. After, The Fall of the Republic came out, Invisible Empire, that was pretty much it. And it has been it. They shifted very, very much so. Sandy Hook, I think he flubbed a lot of that up. I was very careful with that. I thought there were real questions, and I was trying to bring those to their attention. And, I was giving them to guys like Rob Dew and Jacobson, and especially Aaron Dykes, who I respect and love to this day. Truth Stream Media is great.
Yeah.
And it was just ignored. And I actually did a big video last year after Alex Jones did his deposition and talking about deep research and Sandy Hook and, my thoughts on it and what the real evidence showed. And, I don't believe that kids didn't die, and I don't believe there were a bunch of crisis actors and all those other things. There are valid questions, but I knew that after he doubled down on them, he would lose every lawsuit involved. There's no way. He'd have to settle or he would lose them. That's just the way it is. I mean, the way he did was libel. And, I take that position. And then you get the hardcore Jones people being like, oh, you're just jealous or this and that. I'm like, no, that's my opinion based on the evidence I've seen and being on the inside and looking at some of these things on what's going on. Now, it doesn't mean I disavowed the guy or thought he wasn't useful or put out good information. There's plenty of stuff out there, even pre-Trump, that was good stuff. But then the shift to like all Trump all the time, and then that glimpse, that moment where he turned on Trump because of what was going on with Syria and Mattis and the fact he said he was going to get us out, and then all of a sudden Duma happens, right? He apologized a week later. Roger Stone's not a great guy in my opinion. I've never personally met him, but he is the godfather, along with Manafort and others, of modern day lobbying. I have spoken out against modern day lobbying as one of the literal cancers of the anti-constitutional system that's been erected in this country. Okay, you get rid of lobbying and money, that's a start for real democracy again, a real constitutional republic. You can't have it that other way. And I mean, Roger Stone has his hands in so many things insider-wise. Roy Cohn being the mentor of not only Roger, but also close friends and really a mentor to Donald Trump. That's another, thing that you have to be able to mention. If
Gangster
there's any
connections, right?
Yeah, I mean, gangster connections among many other things. Like, there's a couple documentaries out there from this year. Where's My Roy Cohn? And then I forget what the other one is, but I watched both, and this guy, I mean, he was one of the puppeteers. He was a gangster, dude. He really, I mean, forget about it, new gangsters. He was a gangster on a federal level, on a global level. And to ignore those facts, I think is dangerous, right? But again, to automatically say something Trump said or did is bad because Trump said or did it is also very, very dangerous. You know what I mean? And that's why I think that you got to have a level head on all these issues.
Yeah, man, there's just so much there. I mean, I think I heard you talking about it before, but Roy Cohn is almost like the original Epstein, or at least an earlier version of Epstein, right? Running the same honeypot operations and using it for political control.
I mean, you look at Whitney Webb's work, and it's certainly
fantastic. Yeah,
that way. Yeah, I think that she's done a great job. But Roy Cohn wasn't really interested in justice. He wanted to know who the judges and the lawyers on the case were. That's what he cared about. He cared about insidious influence behind the scenes and how he could gain that insidious influence. And I truly believe, even with Epstein, I think there's a lot more going on than just the honeypot operation, right? You're facilitating, the trafficking of humans, probably the trafficking of drugs, absolutely the trafficking of weapons. These are multi-billion-dollar industries, and you've got your hands in these backdoor smoky rooms, if you will, where big deals are being made.
No, that's a really good point. And with the Epstein stuff, again, it almost gets linked to we were talking about earlier about flat Earth and stuff. Well, some people talk about Epstein, and people will say, well, Pizzagate, right? Pizzagate was a full of shit. So obviously, everything to do with Epstein is full of shit. And what I always kind of compare the term Pizzagate to the term conspiracy theorist, right? Which was obviously drawn up to kind of discredit anybody looking into the Warren Commission and into the JFK stuff. And now anybody who's looking into child trafficking or human trafficking is called a Pizzagate enthusiast, which is just insanity to me. I mean, there's so much real evidence there. It's impossible to deny unless you're so kind of blind to it on purpose. Ooh.
Yeah, but again, they just listened to what the media had to say. When you say it in a sentence like these people believe that a satanic child trafficking ring is run out of the basement of a pizza shop by Hillary Clinton, and that's exactly how they portray it,
Hmm.
then people are going to dismiss it out of hand, right?
Yeah.
They're going to dismiss it out of hand. Now, if you start talking about the fact that there is this place that is in these emails, and the owner or proprietor of that place not only has a disturbing Instagram, but his avatar was Antinous, the Greek god of pedophilia. Literally the boy that sat by the king's side, the emperor's side. You
Hmm.
start to get a little bit more attention. And then when you pull up on their phone the Lozado email to John Podesta and others about a farm and kids being Ubered there and their ages and names shown, and the fact that they're going to be in a pool for further entertainment for sure. Well, all of a sudden you get things clicking, you know, and you got to take baby steps. And with anything, you don't just come out and like give the whole shebango. You try to find some mutual point of respect or a mutual point of agreement and expand on that and
Hmm.
show that evidence and go, well, you're a parent. Would you be sending your kids who are 8 to 11 into a pool on a farm with a bunch of people as entertainment? Does that make sense to you? What does that look like to you? And you could sometimes see the chills run up and down somebody's body before they even want to defend it. Let me see that. Let me read that again.
Yeah.
So, with the Pizzagate, Pedogate stuff, you can fall down that rabbit hole. There's a rabbit hole to fall down. But again, it was infiltrated with so much disinformation.
That's right.
4chan, 8chan. I mean, they had that menu that went viral within a week of it, where like they were saying that this was on the website, and you were basically, this is your new hobby, and you were
Hmm.
ordering this and that. So, the media has always focused on the straw man arguments and the easily debunkable, theories that have been put out there either on purpose or by legitimate crazy people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that a lot of it is absolutely intentional, right? They're going to create the most ridiculous sounding narrative. And that's the one that gets focused on, like for Pizzagate, exactly. People talking about handkerchiefs and all that kind of stuff as proof. And while it is odd coded language, it's obviously not proof of anything that was happening, but there's so many coincidences in those emails. If you read through the Podesta emails, that, I mean, it's almost like 9/11 at a certain point, right? There's no hard and fast proof that anything untoward happened, but there are, I mean, there's a million different instances of coincidences, and when you put them all together, it actually, it tips the scale so hard that it almost becomes an impossibility for any other thing to have happened.
Well, I think there's so much obvious criminal evidence on 9/11, forensic evidence. I mean, Dylan's got a new documentary coming out, which Ed Asner is supposed to be voicing now, called Seven, just on the Alaska Fairbanks study.
Yep.
So, I mean, I would definitely say that 9/11 has a multitude of prosecutable evidence. I mean, you look at the testimony of James Woods that nobody still knows about, that was only leaked from the Dark Overlord files. Yeah, I had bits and pieces in Fabled Enemies. But now we actually have the names of the 2 out of the 4 hijackers that were on Flight 11. Okay, Flight 11. And these the guy who looks to be the lead guy, Khalid Al-Madar, is actually the lead hijacker on 77. And when, you have 2-3 weeks before 9/11, a Hollywood actor, the pilot, and a stewardess all filing a report that these men looked like they were going to hijack the plane, and then they hijacked the plane. A few weeks later, and you get confirmation that FBI agents were made aware of it. You get confirmation from Seymour Hersh. You understand that Khalid Al-Madar was living with and renting from an FBI informant. These pieces are right. I mean, I mean, if that's not proof that something else was going on and that they were protected, I don't know what is, but you'll never get a legitimate investigation into any of it.
Right, and I mean, there's so much of stuff that's just like that, though, right? I mean, you have the dancing Israelis who obviously had foreknowledge of what was going to happen, that were sent back without even a slap on the wrist. there's just it seems like at every turn, right? There's Larry Silverstein taking out a massive insurance policy through, I think it was 27 different insurance-based brokers because no one would do it altogether, and for double the value of what it was just recently appraised at. I mean, it goes on and on to him trying to claim two separate terrorist attacks because it was two planes that hit. But I mean, it honestly, it all seems to compound into absolutely nothing because nobody appears to care, right? And even if you go to prosecute, I mean, I'm a big fan of Legal Man. He has the podcast The Quash, and he's always talking about how the Constitution essentially doesn't matter anymore because they've got these vague laws in place, and whenever anything gets taken to court, they're going to interpret it in whatever way benefits the state the best, and that it's going to be thrown out or misinterpreted to the point that they're arguing against the straw man, and then all of a sudden that gets judged against, and then it's going to be over. So I'm not sure if the legal system is ever going to be the way to prosecute anything like this.
It's really one of those things where we erected a national security state in its infancy after World War II, really during World War II with Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project. When we built a network out of that from the OSS and the Nazis and Operation Paperclip into the CIA and later the FBI and the NSA and all these growing organizations. And by the time it had gotten to Eisenhower, in the 60s, pre-JFK, he was already warning us about this military industrial complex. Yeah. And now today, the modern version of this, with not only obviously Homeland Security and all these sub-organizations, but of all these private contracting groups like Booz Allen Hamilton, like Stratfor, like the Kissinger Institute, and so many others, you've muddied the waters even further. And unfortunately, that's the Leviathan we are constantly up against. And if we don't identify that a lot of this stuff is not only unconstitutional, but ongoing and much more powerful than we can imagine, and if we don't dismantle it, I do fear that, this technocratic predator class elite will have their way with society.
And the thing about those private organizations is they're free from FOIA requests, right? So it's like, even though those are going to be full of shit lots of the time and have unfair redactions and, in the name of national security, they take it one step further, one more step removed, and now you can't even get access to those redacted documents.
Correct. It's so troublesome. And, no matter what you think about Snowden, one of the biggest revelations out there is that he's saying straight up some of these classified documents, when he went to go see the unclassified version, it was not something that was redacted. It was a completely separate document altogether.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. And I really don't know what to think about Snowden. I mean, I guess mostly I think he's a limited hangout because I feel like the CIA would kill anybody that were revealing information that they weren't comfortable with getting out. And most of that information that he put out there was out there in earlier forms. So I just have a hard time putting it together.
I would look into Mainway. I've been doing some stuff on Mainway, and I'll say this, there's a lot of documents we never saw. Vault 7 had some really big stuff. James Corbett did Edward Snowjob, and me and him did a broadcast back and forth, on that, and, Assange as well. I think we have to sometimes be just a little bit more cautious and careful as to what is real and isn't, and not everything is 100% manufactured. However, I'm a more voices guy. So you present your evidence, you present your viewpoint, and there's a lot of evidence and a viewpoint that, that could be limited hangout. And look at the payouts to Greenwald and the woman partner and, the billionaire, I'll butcher his name, Alvin Padar or something like that. But I can't quite remember. But there's a lot of shady stuff going on there. At the same time, the more and more information I can get out there to the public that illustrates what's really going on and gets them thinking, the better.
Have you had any success talking to people about stuff like this? Like, I'm not sure how many people in your life aren't necessarily kind of awake to what's happening, but I mean, I work at a paper mill, right? So I work around about 400 other guys, and everybody just talks to me like I'm a novelty, right? They know I'm the conspiracy guy that likes these things, but I think once coffee breaks over, they go back to living their life, reading Wikipedia and the mainstream news and kind of getting their information from there and believing that the news is actually reporting the news instead of furthering an agenda. So I guess, have you had any success talking to people about these things, and kind of what was your angle?
I mean, yeah, I've had super success, man. That's who I am. But not on everything and not to everyone,
Yeah.
but believe me, when something goes down that's crazy, my phone blows up. Like when Epstein got arrested or Ghislaine Maxwell got arrested, by the time, I'm looking at my phone, it's going off and off and off. And sometimes you don't know whether you've had an effect for years. Sometimes you're never going to have an effect. But the bottom line is if you don't try and you don't try to treat people with respect, you're never going to get there. And the other thing is you have to be able to admit when you're wrong. You can't act like you're some kind of deity. I'm not God. I'm going to get things wrong. You're a human being too.
Yep.
There will be moments where our opinions on what's happening are completely wrong, or even things that we think are grounded in facts are not.
Mm-hmm. And like the difference between you and me and the mainstream media, though, as well, you and I will admit we're wrong, and it'll be on the same channel in the same feed. You can have, ABC News showing a Kentucky gun range with heavily doctored footage as alleged Turks attacking the Kurds in Syria, and then their apology is a tiny little note, a footnote on a separate page, never mentioned on their broadcast, right? And they keep that illusion of being that deity that pervades the truth.
Correct, my friend. Correct. And they're good at it, unfortunately. But, especially in this situation now, there are people that are just fed up, small business owners, people that don't want to be wearing a mask, people that can see through the illusion. But they want it all. And I think that if the election were fair in this country, Trump would win by a landslide. But that's not what they're trying. And they're trying as hard as they can to rig it against the guy, whether you like him or not. I think there is a nuanced difference. And unfortunately, I actually do think that this election does matter. Don't get me wrong. The predator class, the deep state, they march forward with their globalist agenda, their new world order agenda, no matter what. But the difference is this time around, I mean, I got a state that doesn't have a Second Amendment right now. You haven't been able to get a pistol permit here since March. Okay. Wow. So you can't have that. And, last month, New York announced that they're suing the NRA, not for money, but to dissolve them. Of course they're coming for your guns here. So they're trying to disarm the public, not only physically, but unfortunately mentally as well.
Speaking of coming for your guns, I mean, that just seems like that's been the main agenda of so many attacks and false flag attacks have been going on in the States. In Canada, we had that one in Nova Scotia that was obvious bullshit that people smelled from the start. Legislation rolled out days after, but, Justin Trudeau says it's a coincidence. It's got nothing to do with the shooting that happened just days before. We just happen to have this legislation ready to pass, kind of like the Patriot Act in the States was ready to go, whatever it was, a week after 9/11, but that's just convenient. And then there's, the Las Vegas massacre, which was obviously some kind of attack. It wasn't the way that they said it was. However you want to say that thing went down. Obviously, it was engineered in some regard, and they used it to try and take away people's guns. And then you have the Port Arthur massacre in Australia. That was one that really woke me up to false flags. That guy had an IQ of 66, which is like, let's be kind, that's retarded, right? Like that's maybe not able to tie your shoes at a very quick pace. And he's shooting people at a rate in the head faster than some special forces guys were saying they could even do it. Like, it's absolutely insane. And yet they had legislation ready to go, pulling the guns out of the populace, and people are willing and ready to do it because of how quickly and how viciously it's portrayed in the media.
Yeah, brother. Again, we got to figure out a way to break the cycle. We got to expose that the media is simply an arm of this predator class, that many of these people are intelligence assets. They are promoting an agenda, and it's not a pro-human agenda. It is an automation nation, transhumanist, UBI agenda, where at the end of the day, a serf class of not that many people maybe get to stick around and serve their dark overlord transhumanist masters.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the way that I look at it, though, is there is some real hope there. I mean, you look at the protests that have been happening in Berlin and in England. Belarus is fighting back in a big way, and then I think they're proof of what happens when an authoritarian state oversteps its boundaries too quickly. Because as David Icke calls it, the tiptoe of totalitarianism that creeps in here. It seems like they started running in Belarus and they fought back pretty quickly, but. Man, at least in Canada, we are so docile. We are so just willing to go along to get along, and I'm legitimately worried about what's going to happen going forward there.
Yeah, no, I'm more than concerned. I'm concerned globally. It's not just the United States. It is Canada. It is South America. It's anybody that bought into this lockdown nonsense. You know,
Yeah.
Europe, we're in a sense, again, we are all in this together. You know, I'm not trying to give you some new age, hippy dippy, globalist nonsense, but this is a human issue. This is the new civil rights. Okay. These people at the top, they don't look at these things like, oh, nation states control this. It's we control the nation states and the agenda. You know, the Peter Thiels of the world, the Rothschilds of the world, the descendants of the Rockefellers, all these people are extremely real and really in power. And there's not many of them. You know, there's not many of them. There's a few thousand of these people, and that's about it. And then they've got tens of thousands of little worker bees and social climbers and people in these organizations like the CFR, et cetera, right? They got the people that climbed into their class like Henry Kissinger, like Richard Haas. But then, you know, they got the government class, they got the lobby class, and they got the little minion class under them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Andrew Cuomo, my governor, he ain't the godfather. He's a capo at best. And until we expose it, until we bring back a constitutional republic, until we get rid of a bunch of these organizations, and we fight back for true freedom across the world, we exit these nations that we have no business being in, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Syria to Nigeria to Libya, etc. Any presence we have there, get out. We need to go.
You know, I don't think enough people talk about Peter Thiel, and I think if they do, it's probably in relation to him suing Gawker essentially through Hulk Hogan and putting that company down, right? There's no reference to Palantir, to pre-crime, to thought crime, to Attorney General Barr being involved there as well. It's just these guys are involved in such insidious, like such nefarious companies and corporations, and yet what we're focused on is whatever division we're arguing about now. It feels like we're all the way down to soy versus almond milk, but it's like we just can't focus on anything that actually matters, right?
No, I agree with you. And Peter Thiel had a special place in my film, Shade the Motion Picture from 2013. You know, I had a 20-minute section on Bill Gates in that film. You know, and that film starts with the Bilderberg Group, and it lets you know, there is this super class, and then it gets into geoengineering and then bioengineering and genetics. And, you know, I know it's hip and cool to go after Bill Gates nowadays, but I've been exposed to the guy for well over a decade. You know, it's like, I'm not jumping on the bandwagon. I never thought this guy was a good guy. I think that, you know, when you look at it, he's one of the most vocal, out and out eugenicists on the planet.
Yeah, and that's saying something. You know, I'm not sure how much Corbett you watch, but he recently put out a piece on Margaret Sanger being a eugenicist, right? Who's the founder of Planned Parenthood, and obviously heavily influential. You even see Hillary Clinton thanking her and all these the Margaret Sanger event. But now even Planned Parenthood has started to distance itself a little bit from Margaret Sanger, right? There's some street or something that they were boulevard that they were taking down. Because of her ties being that close, but it's like the elite class still holds those beliefs. It doesn't matter if they're they're publicly referenced. It's absolutely obvious. I mean, Corbett's done that incredible documentary on Bill Gates, and lots of other people have talked about that as well. But I just wanted to change gears a little bit because I know I'm getting close to the end of my time here with you, and I'd like to end on a hopeful note. And I'm just curious, kind of where, looking forward, do you find hope looking into the future?
Iowa. So I'm moving.
There you go.
You know, during this whole thing, being really frustrated and seeing the writing on the wall, and you know, during this interview, my little niece ran upstairs and wanted some spicy ramen, but my sister and her 2 kids live below me, man. We moved them out here 3.5, almost 4 years ago. We have the whole house to ourselves. You know, I try to do what I can for my family, and I wanted to be gone in June, but in July, I took a road trip. I went from all the way in New Hampshire. I had just happened to be going to New Hampshire to go visit the Jackman brothers, and Ghislaine Maxwell gets arrested. So we went out to her hideout. That was like where I started my trip. And then I went all the way to South Dakota. And I spent 2 or 3 days in states and cities like Cleveland, Ohio, outside of St. Louis in Missouri. I went out to South Dakota. Then I stayed in Iowa. And, you know, I went several places in Missouri because I really, really liked it. And out of everywhere, you know, I felt like not only was the most freedom, I felt the best and this area of Iowa I was at, but they had an education system where the kids might not have to wear masks, and that's something that's kind of huge for me. I don't want them wearing masks. I don't think it's healthy. They're going to be re-looking at that in the system. I've got them in it, I think, October 26th. We're going to be there October 1st. And I mean, my hopeful thing is, look, I don't think I can build the kind of communities that are going to fight this thing in New York. It's going to be a Leviathan here. David versus Goliath may not even represent what this is. However, moving to a much more open-minded place, a place that had, I went to a sporting event there, 3,500 people, white, black, no fights, everybody enjoying themselves, barely anybody wearing masks. This was at the Mississippi Valley Fairgrounds in Iowa. And I think there's a better chance of building a community that's going to fight there. So on an up note, find that community. Don't shut up. Do not comply. Stand up. Tell people the truth. Find your niche. If you don't think that you can have the effect you need to in the right amount of time, move on, right? Because I actually love my community here. My chief of police, I've known him for 20 plus years. He's pissed, but he didn't stand up.
Mm-hmm.
He bought into it. You know what I mean? And not that he believes it, but he doesn't know what else to do. He got to that position by obeying orders. That's what you do as a police officer. So, until you're finding the ones that are going to push back and say, no, this mayor is ruining this town. No, we are going to unlock. No, we're not going to enforce these draconian laws. I'm moving to an area called the Quad Cities where Illinois is on the other side. Okay. And there they do have the mask order. So if I decide to get gas over in Illinois at a BP, I'm wearing a mask. If I decide to get gas at a BP on the other side, I'm not.
Yeah.
And, on the flip of that, sometimes when you have states standing up like that, the real enemy is corporate, right? Walmart mandates them everywhere across the nation. So it doesn't matter if I go to a Walmart in Illinois or Iowa, they expect me to wear a mask. One of the phenomena I saw, especially while being in South Dakota, is, they would LARP in the beginning. You'd walk in and the person be sitting there with a mask and there'd be a pile of masks if you didn't have one. But then you get past that person and 75% of the people in South Dakota are not wearing them. So you're just like, oh, fuck this, and just take it off.
Yeah.
And you need at least more of that. And then, the people in the store aren't bothering you, aren't telling you to put it above your nose or whatever. They realize 3/4 of their customers are ready to walk out if you approach them. So, find where you can fight back. Now is the time to fight back. There is no other time.
Yeah, man, that's a really good point. And I mean, I'm out here in Vancouver, and the mask laws are coming now for some reason, even though it's been the middle of the summer. The numbers have been great. Just like you're saying, the case numbers keep going up. That's because of the fucking scam that is the PCR test. It's nothing to do with anybody being legitimately sick. But still, it's mandatory on transit. It's mandatory in Walmart. It's Superstore, which is one of our big grocery chains, making it mandatory here shortly. So it's coming, and I won't wear one anywhere. I just don't patronize those places if that's the case. But it's going to get to a point where everywhere is going to have it mandatory, and I'm going to be ordering groceries online and all that kind of shit. And then they've effectively pushed me out of the system anyway, right? They found a way to minimize my voice being out there.
Exactly. It's already here. There's nowhere I'm supposed to walk into that doesn't have a mask. They have signs on my street to wear them outside. Okay. Please wear a face covering. I walked into my ATM, which isn't even the bank. It's just the one door where you swipe and it's right there. And they want you to wear a mask at the ATM here. I'm gone. I can't do it here. I can't live action role play like that. I go and get coffee with a friend of mine who I've known for 20 plus years. I got a job with him when I was 19. He's got a pizza shop in town. We shoot the shit in the morning and grab coffee. And his wife is so scared shitless that when she sees us in his business, we've known each other for 20 plus years. In his business, she's outside with a mask on, banging on the window, irate, screaming at us with a red face.
Wow.
Because we're not wearing a mask and we're being human beings and we're talking about our day and we're not buying into the bullshit. And that's what I'm battling every day here, brother. And that's why I'm about to build something new somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people are getting to be that way, man. I think that there's going to be a huge push for homeschooling. I think that nobody wants their kids in that environment. My kids are 3 and 2, so a couple of years away from being in school, but still, I mean, my wife's a teacher, but we're looking hard at homeschooling and those kinds of options. You know, homeschooling pods or pandemic pods, as they like to call them on the news. Like homeschooling wasn't a thing before the pandemic, but it's just like you need to find your own community and make it. Absolutely, I think that's a perfect message for us to end on, man. So thank you so much for doing this. Is there anything coming up, any projects or anything you want to let people know about?
I mean, anybody can support me via my GoFundMe. I'm fully demonetized on YouTube now, 5 months. I appealed it almost 4 months ago. I don't expect them to remonetize myself. You can also support me on Rockfin, where there's some exclusive content. There's free content. It's like a Netflix for creators. If you pay $9.99 a month, you don't just get me, you get everybody. Check me out over on youtube.com while I'm there. We're almost at 57,000 subscribers. Like, share, and subscribe, and make sure to check out all my documentary films. They're in the playlist section at my YouTube channel. They're absolutely 100% free. Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, and Shade the Motion Picture.
Beautiful, Jason. Well, thanks so much for doing this, man. I really appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully we can talk to you again a little bit down the road.
All right, sounds great. Thank you.
All right, beautiful, everybody. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time on the Paperboy Podcast.